So I just reach out and touch a tree and I say, "Hey, old friend. How you feeling? Doing better?"
Hey, bud. Much better.
You're pretty cool, Sun Tree.
Sun Tree, A-okay.
Hey, Sun Tree.
Yeah?
Hello friends, and welcome back to the Hall of Craft. So today I have a bit of a special video for you guys. It's going to be a giveaway, which is a first for me, but I decided that I wanted to give back to the Critical Role community because I've been a part of it for a long time and I've been inspired by it since day one. Before kind of getting into Critical Role, I was only played D&D a couple times, and it was fun. I knew I liked it, but nobody was necessarily bringing their all to the table. And after watching Critical Role and immediately getting hooked by it, I was so inspired by Matt and the rest of them because they just put so much of themselves into it. And immediately upon seeing them do that, I knew that I wanted an experience like that. I wanted a group of people who are just willing to really commit. And I knew that if there was any way to get it, I would have to build it myself. So I think that's a major part of why I got into this hobby in the first place, at least to the extent that I am. So I wanted to give back to that community somehow, because there's so many other amazing talented artists and cosplayers and content creators who have kind of put their piece in the pile, and I wanted to do my share of that. So I have built the Sun Tree for you guys today. It's quite an iconic location character from campaign 1, very beloved, and just kind of a beautiful sight. So I wanted to try and make it, and so that's what I've done today. And if you'd like to win it for yourself, hang around to the end of the video and I'll tell you how. But for now, let's just jump into the build. Okay, so to start out the build, I'm going to take some MDF chipboard, and the sheets come in 12 by 12, but I'm going to want this to be 10 by 10. So I've done a sketch here, roughly, of what I want. I figured 12 by 12 is a little too big, so I'm going to cut it down. So I'm just going to mark an inch off the sides. Then I'm just going to start drawing on it to make sure that I have the right scale. With a mini for reference, I'm just going to start drawing in some little openings for archways. I have these lights here that I got from one of my friends, and I figured they'd be perfect for this. Okay, so just going to cut off the sides that I indicated. Now I have a 1/2 inch thick sheet of polystyrene, and I'm going to trace my base onto it and cut it out. Make sure to use a sharp blade when cutting foam, or else it'll pull and tear, and you want nice clean cuts. So once I've got that cut out, I'm just going to make sure I have room for the battery pack of the light switch that I procured. And I'm going to trace that onto all 3 pieces. So I have a thicker piece of foam here that's going to be kind of the roots of the tree, and then I have the base, which is the 1/2 inch thick, and that's going to be stone, and then the MDF kind of holds it all together. So I'm just gonna cut the base out of all 3 pieces. I'm just gonna test fit as I go to make sure it's big enough. This doesn't have to be pretty. Nobody's really gonna see this part of it. When cutting the MDF, you want to make sure you use multiple really light pressing cuts to get through it. Okay, so now I'm just going to glue all 3 pieces together with some PVA glue. I'm just going to put some books on that to let it dry flat. The MDF chipboard has a tendency to kind of warp when you put moisture on it. So now I'm just going to take a sharp knife and start beveling the edges of my thicker piece of foam. Just want to give the tree a very natural looking slope to sit on. So once that's dry, I'm going to take my thicker piece of foam and glue that on top as well. Before I glue the pink foam on, I need a little ledge for the battery pack to sit on. Unfortunately, the battery pack opens from both sides, so the switch is on one side and it opens to put the batteries in on the other side. So you're going to need to be able to pull it out. So I figure if I give it a little ledge to sit on, you can put it up inside and it won't fall out, but you can still have access to it. Okay, so while that's drying, I guess, I'm cutting out some cardboard kind of templates for the shape of the tree. So originally I make it about 2.5 wide by 6 inches tall, and I think that's a little too tall. Because this is just the skeleton of the tree, my tree would be massive if I used that. So I like the shape, so I'm just gonna trace it out but make it a couple inches shorter. This is basically just the stump of the tree, and all of the branches are going to come afterwards. Okay, so that's a little better. I'm going to trace that out again, and then kind of draw it slightly differently, a little bit smaller, and cut that out for the other side of the tree. And I'm just going to cut a slit in the middle, and use that to kind of prop these together. So I'll just hot glue that so it stays. So I'm going to mark where that lands on the foam, and then I'm going to cut little notches for it so it can sit a little deeper inside and be a little more secure. And then I'll just put dabs of hot glue in there and glue it in place. So once that's in there, I'm just going to cut some more pieces of cardboard to represent the roots and give it a little more structure, and then glue those on, and then I'm going to start working on the branches. So I'm using the fan art that I referenced at the beginning of the video, and it has these really awesome curving, whimsical looking branches, and I really want to try and emulate that. So I'm going to draw them all out on my cardboard and then cut them out individually and start gluing them on. Okay. So I glued a bunch of those on already, and you can see it's starting to take shape. Just keep spinning it around and kind of looking at the open areas and assessing where it needs a new branch and where it could use to have a little more open space. Just playing it by ear as I put this together. Okay, so that's looking pretty rigid, but I like the shape. So I'm going to take my hot glue and I'm going to bend the branches into a more organic shape. And then I'll just hold it while it dries until it kind of keeps the bend that I put in. And I'm just going to do that all over. Super easy. This also helps strengthen the tree a little bit. So this is time to start building up the roots of the tree. This is a classic DM Scotty crafting method. If you haven't seen his channel, I'll link it in the top right, but how did you find me before him? He's the OG craft daddy. So this method is just to roll up some paper towel or toilet paper. In this case we're going to do both, but for the roots, paper towel, and then you spray it with a water bottle and just kind of dump some white glue on it. So in the squirt bottle I have a mix of half water, half white glue, and then in the PVA bottle is just straight white glue. So you basically do a paper mache method with this. I am kind of rolling it up to make root shapes and then gluing it in place. This method is not my favorite to do, but you can't argue with the results. The reason I'm not a huge fan is because it takes forever to dry, but it's just too good to not use for this build. So after I make the roots, I'm going to take some toilet paper and just wrap it around the tree, and then I'm just going to start building up chunks and kind of padding in the areas that look a little sparse. Just being very, very liberal with glue usage. This is going to be sopping wet, a total mess while you're working on it. So I did this in two parts. The trunk and the roots I did on one day, and then I left it to dry for probably like 3 days, and then I came back and now I'm doing the branches. So the branches, just the same method, getting it all soaking wet with white glue and water, and then kind of placing it around the branches to try and pad them up and give them that bark texture. And once this dries, it just looks incredible. Like, this takes paint so well, and it's so detailed. I have yet to find another method of making bark that works better than this one. It's also super cheap to do, which is a plus, but the main downside is how long it takes to dry, which is why I usually carve things. Once this is dry, it's also going to be really rigid. This is a very, very sturdy way to build the tree, which is another reason I'm using it. With all of the branches kind of shooting off in different directions, I didn't want this to be flimsy, so I want a result that's going to be really durable. And this method gives you that. So I'm just spinning the tree around, making sure I didn't miss any areas, and just bulking up all the branches to whatever thickness I desire at the time. The hot glue that we put on the branches in the last step is also helping them not get too soggy with all of this paper mache all over it. So once I'm done the branches, I'm going to go back to the area that I did the other day at the bottom of the trunk and start padding up some of the connection where the trunk meets the roots, so it's not quite so abrupt. And then once I'm content with it, I'm just going to douse this thing in water and glue and then set it aside to dry. So that took about a day. The branches dried way faster than the trunk did. I was pleasantly surprised, but as you can see, it's pretty sturdy. You wouldn't expect it to be, but the trunk is rock solid. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to start drawing on the rock pattern for the stairs. I kind of want like a slab stone look to this thing. So I'm just going to start freehanding that on, roughly inch by inch squares, kind of replicating the steps that I carved out already. And then I'm gonna take my knife and kind of bevel the edges. of all these lines that I've just drawn. So I'm just going to go at a 45-degree angle on the left side and a 45-degree angle on the right side, and then you get this nice little triangle of foam that you can pick out with the blade of your knife. This is a really good method for making your stone patterns look intentional, and I usually love the result. So now I'm just going to take a tinfoil ball and just texture up this to look like stone. So just kind of like roll it all over and make sure to not use the same side of the tinfoil ball over and over again. So I'll just do that on the whole thing. And now I'm going to take a piece of cardstock and a mini for scale, and I'm just going to start making the template for the archways that I want to have over top. So the footage of me making the template got corrupted, but I basically drew out that archway shape on the cardstock and then used it to trace out the archway on the foam. And now I'm using my Proxon to cut out the archways because I want nice clean cuts. And it's a little intricate, so using a knife for this would be harder, and I have the Proxon, so I might as well use it. So once I've got them all cut out, I'm going to take a pen and I'm going to start drawing on some of the details to these. So basically just the big slabs at the bottom and then the keystones at the top. And then I'm going to use the tinfoil ball to texture them up as well. So once I've done that, I'm going to use my hot glue gun and glue them over the steps. Okay, so now that this is all together, I'm going to use the Black Magic base coat over top of the whole thing. So thanks Jeremy for this recipe, I use it all the time. I'll link up to it in the top right now if you want to make your own. It's super simple. Okay, so once that's dry, it's time to paint. I'm going to start with the stone, and because it's from white stone I want it to be a little lighter, so I'm going to use a taupe as my base coat, and then a light taupe on top of that. And then I'm going to use a suede and a vanilla as the final color for the stone. So I'll start with the dark taupe. I'm going to water it down a little bit and then just coat all the stone. If you water down your craft paints, they have an easier time kind of getting in the nooks and crannies, so doing that for a base coat is pretty productive. Okay, so I'll leave that to dry for a bit, and then I'll come in with the light taupe. I'm going to put it on a sponge, and then just kind of dab all over it. Then I have a smaller sponge for the tight areas. Okay, now we're going to use the suede. And I'm just going to dry brush this. So I have a piece of paper towel, I just load up my brush with paint, and then I wipe almost all of it off. A good way to test if your brush is light enough, paint-wise, to dry brush, is to kind of hit the back of your hand or your fingernails, and that'll really show you how much paint is coming in. Okay, so once I've done that dry brush, I'm going to use some espresso color and water that down a fair bit, and then coat all of the bark for the sun tree itself. You'll really notice the effect of watering it down for this step because there's so many nooks and crannies on the bark of this tree. If you don't water down your paint, you're going to use like 3 times as much paint to try and get a base coat. Okay, so leave that for a little bit to dry, and then I'm going to come back and just use a brown. Bottle just says brown. It's kind of like a nice light orangey brown though. And then I'm just going to take that and brush it all over. I'm not too concerned about getting into the nooks and crannies, and I'm mostly coming from like an upward angle so that the shadow areas can stay darker. And the reason we're painting the tree before finishing off the base is because we're just going to wash the whole thing after they're both done. So I have a golden brown as my highlight here, but it's a little too bright on its own. So I'm going to mix some of the brown in, and then I'm going to paint it the same way I just painted the brown. So I'm not too worried about getting 100% coverage, just kind of getting the paint on there and leaving the cracks to expose that kind of dark brown from the undercoats. Okay, so once that's dry, I'm going to come in with my dark brown wash, which is basically just super watered down paint. I make it with acrylic ink and some flow improver and some matte medium and water, but you can just use water and paint if you don't want to buy those extra ingredients. So I just coat the whole thing in that. It's going to pool a little bit, but we're going to come back after we coat it, and we're just going to wipe the excess away that we don't want. But the great part about this is it brings out all the detail that you work so hard to put into this thing. Okay, so here I am taking the pools away, and it's super easy. You just take a glass of water, dip your brush in, and then dry it off a little bit and soak up the pooling. So I'll leave that overnight to dry, and then I'm going to come back and add some further detail to it. So I've heard a lot about these makeup brushes from the dollar store that people have been using to dry brush, so I figured I'd try it myself. Pretty good. Would recommend. So here I have the suede again, and I'm gonna use that to dry brush the stone and get some of that light tones back, because the wash goes a little extreme sometimes, but we accounted for this in the plan. So I'm just going to dry brush all over the stone, get that suede on the high areas, and then I'm going to use the vanilla. So I'm not even going to bother cleaning the brush, just going to load it up with vanilla and then dry brush even more. Focusing kind of on the higher areas, but seeing as it's a stone platform, there's not too many high areas. Okay, so once I'm done that, pretty happy with the white stone look, I'm going to grab a new brush. I'll wash them out after this thoroughly, but for now I want to keep moving, so I'll grab a new brush and just come in with the golden brown and dry brush all over the bark of the tree. And you can see it just really pops out all that detail from the paper mache method. All of the little folds in the bark just pop out at you when you do this. I want to add a second highlight, so I add a little bit of vanilla to my golden brown here. It's a little intense. At the time I thought it might have been a mistake. In the final product though, it looks fine, so I'll leave you to decide. So now that I'm done painting, I need to get these lights into the tree. So I don't have a drill with a long bit, so I need to find a way to poke a hole in this thing. So I sharpen a dowel and a pencil sharpener here, and I just start kind of forcing it up through the bottom. I can't really get it on camera, but the way I eventually succeeded doing this is I took it off screen and used a hammer to kind of drive it through, and you can see that it does pierce through the top there just a little bit. Holes big enough for the lights to come through, but not too big that it's going to look ridiculous. Okay, so I'm going to uncoil my lights and straighten it out, and then just feed it up through the bottom. This either works right away, or you spend 15 minutes trying to get it to feed through without bumping into stuff. And then I'm just going to take the wire and just coil it around all the branches. I want the sun tree to look like it's glowing, so this is how the lights are going to be. It's at this point where I start to realize I made a big mistake. So I take the battery pack out and I put the batteries in after I struggle to open them. And they turn on and they're purple. When I was working with my friend and she showed me these lights, she had 2 packs. One of them was orange and I guess this one was purple. And I loved the orange one so much that she said I could have the other ones. And I didn't realize they were purple. So that would have been great if I'm making a fey tree, but we're making the sun tree. I can't have purple lights. So I take a deep breath, order some new lights on Amazon, and I just keep working on it. So, gonna take some glue and put it around the areas of the roots where I want there to be grass, and then I'm gonna take some flocking that I got at Michael's and just sprinkle it around. I have 2 kinds, a medium and a dense, and I just kind of place the dense where I want it to be, and then sprinkle the medium over top of it. And then I'm gonna leave that for a little while to dry. Once it's dry, I'm gonna take a brush and kind of brush it off like an archaeologist, because I don't want the pieces that aren't firmly adhered to stay, because I don't want to send this to one of you guys and then have it be shedding flock everywhere. Nobody wants that. So I make sure to tap it all off, get rid of all the excess, just the stuff that's stuck can stay. And I'm pretty happy with that. It kind of gives a nice organic look to this. So I'm just going to shake off what's left back into my container and then keep on building. Okay, so next day. Thank God I have Prime. 1 day shipping is the best. So I have these new lights. Gonna test them first this time. Bingo. Orange lights. So I've already taken off the other ones. We've tested to make sure these are orange, and now it's time to feed them through. Another key move was I made sure I got the exact same brand of lights so that all of the holes I cut still fit. So I'm going to feed the wire through. This one did not want to go as easily as the other one. I had to use tweezers and I fought with it for a little bit, but I eventually got it through and fed all 20 feet worth of wire through, and now I'm going to coil it around the branches like I did before. I actually like this one a lot better because the wire is a copper color, whereas the purple lights had kind of a silver wire, and I wasn't really digging the look anyway. This copper wire looks a little more natural, like it could be a vine or something. Gives it kind of a magical look. So I'm just going to test it, turn it on. Looks amazing. I'm really happy with it. So now I have these kind of ball foliage from the dollar store. This one looks a lot like grass. So I'm just going to peel the pieces off, cut it into individual strands, and then kind of glue them around the base. The reference photo that I have has a lot of dense looking grass around it, so I'm kind of replicating that. It also has a lot of flowers, so I got these at Michael's, nice blue flowers, and I think it'll add a nice pop of color to the base of this thing. So I'm just going to rip off the heads and glue them onto the grass that I just put out, kind of in the middle so it looks like they're one plant. And the blue will hopefully contrast all the orange I add to this thing. So once that's done, I have this other ball foliage that looks a lot more like leaves. I got 2 of them. They're super cheap. And the way this is it's kind of a mesh at the bottom, and there's little like sprues that stick onto it. And each sprue has like 4 branches. So you just kind of find your way in there and then pick it off, and you have ready to glue foliage. The other thing I do to this is I take a pair of scissors and I just kind of trim that stump at the bottom so that I don't have to glue a bunch of stumps onto this tree. So I'm just gonna pick them all off, cut the stump, and then put a dab of hot glue and attach it to the end of one of the branches. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason for the way that I approach this next 5-10 minutes of building it. I just put a bit of glue, find an area that looks like it needs some leaves, and then stick it on. Typically when I'm building trees for D&D or tabletop gaming in general, I don't like to make them too dense because then they kind of obscure vision of the table, and that's, while it looks amazing, it's counterproductive, and I don't want my players to be struggling to see the table. So this is kind of a first time for me making a foliage realistic tree where it's just kind of super dense and leaves everywhere. Pretty happy with how it's turning out so far though. This is where it starts really coming together and actually feeling like it's alive. We were kind of briarwood, whitestone, sun tree before, and now we're kind of going full grown sun tree now. We're on our way anyway. If you've noticed the quality in the video suddenly increase, it's because I got a new camera. Fingers crossed, no more corrupt footage issues. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, and I have a couple more types of foliage to add to this, so I don't want to overdo it on the green. I have these wonderful orange branches that I got at Michael's. They're kind of expensive, but they look fantastic, and I walked past them and I was like, I knew right away these were for the sun tree. They had to be. So I'm just going to peel a bunch of them off and then start gluing them in place, kind of tucking them underneath the green leaves. The reference photo has these amazing swirling branches that are totally fantastical and kind of unobtainable in real life, but gonna do my best to replicate that by gluing these strategically. So I'm making sure to glue these to the trunks and the branches of the tree. Like, I want the connection to be sturdy, so I'm not gluing foliage to other foliage. Everything is connected to the trunk of the tree, which should be pretty good. Okay, so while I was at Michael's, I also got these light yellow ones, because when working with foliage, I always find it's better to have multiple tones, because if everything's the same shade, it doesn't look very natural. And I want the sun tree to look fantastical. These ones are also kind of bigger and have a little more motion to the shape of them, which is nice. What the hell? So at this point, the universe told me I had been working on this tree for too long, and my power went out. Therefore, my hot glue gun started cooling down. So I assumed that that meant it was enough foliage. I gave it a little test to turn on the lights, and I was pretty proud of myself at this point in time. I think it looks fantastic. So I was looking at the base and I felt it could use a little more leafiness to keep up with the top of the tree. So I have these foliage tabs. They kind of have adhesive on the bottom and you just peel them off and stick them on. So I just put a drop of hot glue and then stuck it onto the hot glue, and that'll keep it secure forever. So like any build, there's one final step required, and that is varnish. So I'm just going to mix up some varnish and some Foliage and a little bit of water in my airbrush, and this is gloss varnish, and I'm just going to spray coat the whole thing. Very, very thorough coating of the tree to try and protect all of the hard work that we've done with paint. It'll also help adhere the foliage to the base and helpfully adhere the branches to the tree itself. And that's it, friends. That's all there is to the build. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. It took me quite a lot longer than I anticipated at the beginning, but I think it turned out really great. So if you want to win this sun tree for yourself, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment below with what you're inspired by. I want to see all of that in the comments because I'm really excited to see all of that inspiration in one place. So if you want to win this, just do those 3 things and I will reach out to you at the end of the month for your shipping information so that I can send it in the mail. Hope you guys had a good time. I know I did. I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.